When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because I had no tears left, or maybe because I didn't want her to see how much it broke me. That smile, small and trembling, was my last defense against a heart that felt like it was shattering. People always say that motherhood is a lifetime of love, but they never tell you how lonely it can become once your children grow up. They never tell you that one day, the same child who once clung to your hand might let it go, not out of anger, but out of choice. I used to believe love was enough to hold a family together. I believed that if I gave everything, my time, my care, my sacrifices, it would come back to me one day in warmth and gratitude. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes it stands at the door waiting to be let back in. That day, the sun was shining, but the house felt dim. I stood in the doorway, suitcase by my side, my heart heavy, but my face calm. My uncle, my only son, was there. He didn't say much. Um, he couldn't look at me for long. His silence said everything words couldn't. And so I stood there, pretending to be strong for both of us. As the car drove away, I looked out the window and saw him standing there, one hand on the doorframe, his eyes distant. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't angry, that I understood that maybe this was just how life teaches us to let go. But all I could do was whisper softly, "Goodbye, my boy," though he couldn't hear me. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when Michael was my whole world. My whole world. I still remember the way he'd run into my arms after school, his backpack bouncing behind him. "A mom!" He'd shout, his face lighting up with pure joy. His little hands would hold my cheeks as if to make sure I was real. Those moments made every hardship worth it. After my husband passed away, it was just the two of us. I worked extra hours at the diner, sometimes double shifts, just to keep things together. There were nights I'd come home exhausted, but Michael would still be awake, sitting by the window with a glass of milk waiting for me. He used to say, "I can't sleep until you're home, Mom." Those words carried me through every storm. He grew up fast, faster than I was ready for. One moment I was teaching him to tie his shoes, and the next I was watching him pack for college. The night before he left, we sat together in the kitchen, both pretending not to be sad. He said, "Mom, I'll call you every day." I smiled and said, "You don't have to, sweetheart. Sweetheart, just take care of yourself." But I waited for those calls every night. When he graduated, I was there in the crowd, holding back tears as he walked across the stage. I thought about every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every small victory that led to that moment. He spotted me in the crowd, waved, and mouthed, "I love you." I thought to myself, no matter where life takes him, I'll always have that. Years passed, and Michael became the kind of man I had hoped he'd be: kind, hardworking, gentle. He got a job, moved to a new city, and for a while things stayed the same. He called often, came home on holidays, and made sure I never felt forgotten. Until one day, he told me he'd met someone. Her name was Sarah. He spoke about her with a light in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Imam, she's special," he said. "You'll love her." I smiled and I meant it. I wanted to love whoever he loved. I wanted to believe she'd bring more joy into his life, not take any away. When he brought her home to meet me, I could see why he adored her. She was graceful, well spoken, the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. I welcomed her with open arms. We cooked together that night, and she told me about her family, her dreams. I listened, thinking maybe I was gaining a daughter, not losing a son. For weeks after their wedding, the house was full of laughter and new energy. Michael's deep voice and Sarah's light giggles filled every room. I'd watch them from the kitchen sometimes, feeling content just seeing him happy. I didn't need much anymore, just his presence, his peace. But love is fragile when shared unevenly. Slowly, things began to shift. Sift. The laughter grew quieter. My place in their home became smaller. I wasn't sure when it started, but I began to feel like a guest instead of family. I told myself it was just adjustment, that every new couple needed time. Still, something in me knew change was coming. Sometimes I would find Sarah's eyes lingering on me, her smile polite but distant. She was never cruel, but she didn't know how to love me either. And maybe I didn't know how to step back. I kept trying to help cooking, cleaning, making things easier. Ugh. But the more I tried, the more it felt like I was in the way. I could sense Michael's quiet unease too. He wanted to keep peace, but his heart was torn between two worlds, his mother and his wife. And I, without meaning to, became the silence between them. That silence grew heavier with time. Order, conversations thinner. I could feel their eyes exchange small glances when I spoke, the kind that said more than words. Still, I stayed gentle. I told myself that love requires patience. That maybe one day she'd see me not as competition, but as someone who only wanted her happiness. But life doesn't always give you the ending you imagine. Sometimes it gives you a lesson instead. And so that day came, the day my son stood beside his wife and asked me to go. But instead, I smiled. Because love, even when it hurts, doesn't stop being love. It just learns to be quiet. And as I closed my suitcase and stepped outside, the world looked the same. Blue sky, quiet street, birds in the distance. But inside me, everything had changed. I wasn't just leaving a house, I was leaving behind the last piece of the life I once knew. That was the day my son closed his door on me. But I told myself it wouldn't stay closed forever, forever. Because a mother's heart, no matter how bruised, always keeps a small light on, waiting for the day her child remembers the way home. When Michael told me he was getting married, I remember the way his eyes lit up. He was so full of life, so sure about his choice. I had seen that glow before, the kind that only comes from love. I smiled, even though my heart trembled a little. Every mother dreams of seeing her child happy, even if part of her knows that happiness will take them farther away. I met Sarah for the first time over dinner. She was polite, beautiful, with a soft voice and confident smile. She called me a Mrs. Carter at first, but I told her, please call me Mom. She laughed and said, all right, Mom, I thought it was a good beginning. When they got married, I was the proudest woman in the room. Watching Michael at the altar brought tears to my eyes. I kept remembering the little boy who used to hold my hand when crossing the street, now holding another woman's hand, starting a new life. I whispered to myself, you did good, my boy. After the wedding, they decided to stay with me until they found a bigger place. I was happy. The house had felt empty for so long after my husband passed. The sound of laughter in the hallway, 2 cups on the table instead of 1, made me feel alive again. I wanted them to feel at home, to feel loved. The first few weeks were peaceful. Sarah helped me with the dishes. We cooked together. We even watched TV in the evenings. I remember one night we sat on the couch laughing at an old sitcom and she said, you remind me of my mom. I smiled and said, that's the best thing anyone could say to me. I thought we were becoming close, but slowly things began to change. It started small, almost invisible. Sarah began spending more time in her room. Michael stopped sitting with me for breakfast. They said they were busy, tired, or had plans. I tried not to take it personally. Newlyweds need their space, I told myself. It's natural. Still, sometimes I'd find myself standing at the kitchen door, listening to the quiet. The house didn't echo with laughter anymore. I started making smaller portions of food because the plates I set out were often left untouched. One morning, I woke up early and decided to surprise them with pancakes. I made them golden and soft, just like Michael used to love. When they came downstairs, Sarah smiled faintly and said, oh, we were planning to go out for brunch today. I'd out for brunch today. Mom, maybe next time. I stood there holding the spatula, the smell of butter filling the air, and said, of course, next time. After they left, I sat down alone at the table and ate one pancake. It tasted cold. Sometimes when Michael came home late, I'd stay up to ask if he'd eaten. He'd smile and say, Mom, you don't have to wait up. I'm fine. But mothers don't stop waiting. Even when our children grow up, we wait for their footsteps, their voices, their hugs. I would nod and say goodnight, but I'd stay awake a while longer, just listening to the silence. Sarah and I began to have fewer conversations. I noticed small things, how she rearranged the kitchen without asking, how she replaced my old curtains, how she sighed when I told stories about Michael's childhood. Once, I showed her a photo of him as a boy, his face smeared with chocolate. She smiled, but it was tight, almost forced. He looks different now, she said, and then walked away. I tried harder after that. I offered to help her with laundry, to make her tea when she looked tired. She always thanked me, but her eyes said something else. A mix of discomfort and distance. Mix of discomfort and distance. It was as if my kindness had become a reminder of something she didn't want, my presence. Then one evening, while setting the table for dinner, I heard them whispering in the next room. Their voices were low, but I caught a few words. Sarah said, her mom needs to understand this is our house now. No. My heart skipped a beat. I stood there, holding a plate, unsure whether to pretend I hadn't heard. When they came out, both smiled at me like nothing had happened. I smiled back, my chest tight. That night, when I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I told myself not to cry. I didn't want to be one of those mothers who made her son choose. I wanted to be understanding, patient, kind, but inside, I felt something I couldn't name. A quiet ache that grew heavier each day. The next weekend, they went to visit Sarah's parents. They stayed overnight. I spent the evening alone, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the streetlights glowed softly, and the world felt far away. I remembered when Michael used to bring me tea after dinner, saying, "You've done enough for today." "Mom, now." He didn't even call, ask if I'd eaten. When they came back the next day, Sarah carried shopping bags and looked happy. She talked about how lovely her parents' home was, how peaceful, how warm. Michael kissed my forehead before going upstairs, and I clung to that small gesture like it was everything. 'Cause it was. As days passed, I felt the air between us growing thicker. I walked softly, spoke less, tried not to be seen as a burden. When Sarah invited her friends over, I stayed in my room. I heard them laughing in the living room, their voices young and full of life. I sat on my bed, knitting quietly, pretending not to mind. But my hands shook and the thread tangled. One afternoon, while I was dusting the living room, I accidentally knocked over a picture frame. It was their wedding photo. The glass cracked across the middle, splitting their faces apart. Splitting their faces apart. My heart sank. I cleaned it up carefully, but Sarah walked in just as I was picking up the last piece. She frowned. "Oh no, that was expensive. I'm sorry," I whispered. "It's fine," she said, but the tone didn't match the words. After she left, I sat down on the couch and held the empty frame. The broken glass shimmered in the sunlight like tiny tears. I thought about how fragile everything had become. The photo, the glass, the love that once filled this house. That night, when Michael came home, I waited for him to bring it up, but he didn't. Bring it up, but he didn't. Maybe she did, and he just didn't want to talk about it. Either way, the silence between us stretched farther. I began to notice how often he avoided being alone with me. He'd stay longer at work, eat dinner quickly, spend his evenings watching TV upstairs. When I asked how his day was, he'd answer in short sentences. "A good mom, a busy mom, a tired mom." I stopped asking after a while. The house that once felt full now echoed with emptiness. I tried to fill it with chores, but no matter how clean it was, it still felt cold. So I would walk into the kitchen, and imagine the laughter that used to fill it, the clatter of dishes, the warmth of family. But those sounds belong to the past now. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something was shifting, something I couldn't stop, no matter how much love I poured into that home. It was as if I was slowly becoming invisible in the very place I thought I belonged. The days that followed my son's wedding were like quiet ripples after a storm. On the surface, everything looked calm, but underneath, I could feel the tension slowly growing. It started with little things, things that most people would ignore. A silence at the breakfast table, a glance that lasted a second too long, a door that stayed closed when it used to be open. Sarah tried to be polite at first. She smiled when we spoke, but her words always had an edge, a coldness hidden behind courtesy. I tried to stay kind, to give her space. I told myself, if she's young, she'll adjust. It's not easy living with someone's mother. But as weeks turned into months, I began to see that it wasn't just adjustment. It was rejection. Softly wrapped in politeness, Michael was caught between us. I could tell. He loved me, but his new life demanded something else from him. Distance. Every time I brought up how quiet the house had become, he would sigh and say, "Mom, you're reading too much into things." Maybe I was. Maybe I just didn't want to accept that love changes shape after marriage. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen cooking his favorite dish, chicken stew with rosemary. The smell filled the whole house, warm and comforting. When Michael walked in, I expected him to smile like he used to. Instead, he frowned. Ma, you should know. Sarah wanted to cook tonight. I turned around, holding the wooden spoon. Oh, I didn't know. I just thought. He interrupted softly. It's fine. It's fine. We'll eat together, but maybe next time. Just ask her first. Okay? His tone wasn't angry, but it carried something that hurt more than anger. Detachment. I nodded quietly and went back to stirring the pot, but the joy of cooking was gone. I could feel Sarah watching me from the doorway, not saying anything, but her silence spoke volumes. Later that evening, while we ate, the table felt too small for 3 people. Sarah and Michael chatted about work and friends. I sat there, smiling when they looked my way, but I didn't understand half of what they were talking about. Their laughter sounded like it came from another world, a world I used to belong to but wasn't invited into anymore. One night, I overheard them talking in the living room. I hadn't meant to listen. I was just passing by when I heard my name. Sarah's voice was calm but firm. She's always around, Michael. I feel like we never have time for ourselves. Oh, Michael sighed. Oh, she's just trying to help. I know, but this is our home now. Don't you think we deserve some privacy? There was a long pause before Michael replied, "I'll talk to her." Those words echoed in my mind all night. I'll talk to her. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like I was a problem to be solved. I'm a person who had given him her whole life. The next morning, I woke early before the sun rose. I made tea and sat by the window. The house was still, and the first light of dawn painted soft lines on the walls. I thought about when Michael was little, how he'd run to me every morning, his hair messy, his smile bright. "Good morning, Mama," he'd shout, jumping into my arms. Ame. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime. When Michael finally came into the kitchen that morning, I smiled. "A morning, sweetheart." He smiled back, but it was faint, distracted. "A morning, Mom." I could tell something was on his mind. After a long silence, he said, Mom, can we talk? I nodded slowly. My hands tightened around my teacup. He sat down, his eyes shifting nervously. "It's nothing bad," he began. "It's just Sarah feels a little uncomfortable. She thinks maybe you could spend a few days at Aunt Linda's just for a break. It's not permanent, just for a little space." I stared at him, trying to process what he said. I repeated softly, He nodded quickly. You've been helping us so much, but I think she just wants time to settle in, to feel like it's her home too. I wanted to tell him that this was my home, that I'd been there since before Sarah even knew where the light switches were. But I didn't. I looked at him, my son, my baby, and all I saw was confusion in his eyes. He wasn't cruel. He was just lost between two worlds. That day, I decided to give them space. I spent most of my time in my room, knitting, reading, or just staring out the window. The laughter outside my door became fainter each day. They watched movies together, cooked together, went out on weekends. I stayed behind, convincing myself I was happy just seeing him happy. But at night, when the house was silent, I would sit on the edge of my bed and wonder when I had become an outsider in my own child's life. I had always imagined that when he married, I would gain a daughter. Instead, I felt like I had lost a son. One evening, I made dinner early. I wanted to surprise them with something nice, roast chicken and mashed potatoes. When they came home, Sarah's smile faded the moment she saw the table. "Oh," she said softly, "we already ate out." The words hit me like a quiet slap. I forced a smile. "That's all right. I can save it for tomorrow." "That's all right. I can save it for tomorrow." Michael avoided my eyes. "Sorry, Mom. We should have called." I nodded. "It's okay." But when they went upstairs, the tears finally came. I sat alone at the table, the food getting cold. I whispered to myself, "You're overreacting. Don't cry." But I couldn't stop. The sound of their laughter upstairs made the house feel like it belonged to someone else. After that night, I cooked less. I talked less. I became a shadow in the background, present, but unseen. Every smile I gave was an effort, every conversation a balancing act, trying not to say too much, trying not to be in the way. Then came the day I heard them arguing. I was in the kitchen, pretending not to listen. Sarah's voice trembled with frustration. "She's still here, Michael." I can't relax in my own home. Michael's tone was tired. "I told you, she's my mom. Where do you expect her to go?"
Sarah's voice broke.
"Anywhere but here." Those words were the beginning of the end of the end. I froze, my hand shaking as I gripped the counter. I didn't hear the rest of their conversation. I just felt a deep ache in my chest. The kind that comes when you realize love isn't enough to keep people close. That night, when I went to bed, I whispered a small prayer. Small prayer. God, help me find peace in this house, even if it's not mine anymore. And deep down, I think I knew. The door that once always opened for me was slowly beginning to close. I just wasn't ready to see it happen yet. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows moving slowly as cars passed outside. I could hear faint laughter from Michael and Sarah's room earlier that evening, but it faded quickly. It had been weeks since I'd felt welcome in that house. Every word I said seemed to land wrong. Every gesture misunderstood. I used to cook breakfast for them, but Sarah had started saying, "You don't have to, Mom. I'll handle it." I thought she was being kind. Soon became kind. But soon it became clear she meant, "Please stop." For the day everything broke, it started out like any other. I made coffee early in the morning, just the way Michael liked. 2 sugars, no cream. When I set it on the counter, he was rushing around, late for work. I said, "Your coffee's ready, sweetheart." Sweetheart. He didn't even look at me. "I'll grab one on the way," he muttered, tying his shoes. I smiled faintly, but inside, something cracked. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about how invisible I'd become in his life. Later that day, Sarah came home early. I was folding laundry in the living room when she stood in front of me, her arms crossed. "We need to talk," she said. I wanted to say, "This is my son's house too," but the words caught in my throat. I could see it in her eyes. This conversation wasn't open for debate. When Michael came home that evening, I hoped he would defend me. He sat quietly at the table while Sarah spoke again, repeating her lines about needing space and privacy. I waited for him to say, "A mom isn't going anywhere." But he just rubbed his temples and said, Maybe it's for the best right now, Mom. You could stay with Aunt Linda for a while. I stared at him, trying to understand if I'd heard right. For a moment, the world stopped. For a while, I asked softly. He didn't look up. Just until things calmed down, he said. The words hit harder than a storm. All the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights when he was sick, the pride I felt at his graduation. Everything flashed before me in a blur of disbelief. I felt small, like the walls of the room were closing in on me. I nodded slowly. Of course, Michael, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was calm, too calm, like it belonged to someone else. Sarah looked relieved, and that hurt even more. I excused myself and went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. My suitcase was already in the corner, half packed from a few days earlier. Maybe deep down, I'd known this was coming. When I heard a soft knock on the door, I thought maybe Michael had come to apologize, to tell me not to go. But it was Sarah. Susie. She stood there hesitant. I'm sorry if I made this uncomfortable, she said. Her voice was polite, practiced. I looked at her, this woman my son loved, and felt a wave of exhaustion. It's your home, I whispered. You should live the way you want. She nodded and quietly left. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house was louder than usual. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards. I listened for Michael's footsteps, hoping he'd come to my room, but he didn't. The silence between us was heavier than words. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The air felt cold. I made breakfast one last time, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee for him, tea for myself. When he walked into the kitchen, he looked surprised to see me up. Mom, you didn't have to do that, he said. I smiled faintly. I know. We ate in silence. The clock ticked louder than ever. When it was time to leave, I went to my room and zipped my suitcase. Michael helped me carry it to the car. Sarah stood by the door, her arms folded tightly, watching. Michael hugged me briefly, almost awkwardly. His scent was the same, clean, familiar, like every memory of him growing up. I held on a little longer than he did. When I stepped back, I said, take care of each other. He nodded, avoiding my eyes. As I got into the cab, my heart felt like it was being torn in half. Through the window, I saw them standing together, my son and his wife, a picture of the life I had once dreamed for him. I thought that would bring me peace, but all I felt was distance. As the car started moving, I looked back one last time. Michael raised his hand slightly, just a small wave. Just a small wave. I smiled and waved back, pretending I was strong, but inside, I was breaking. Every street we passed felt like another thread of my old life unraveling. By the time we turned the corner, the house was gone from view, and I realized that something inside me had closed too. Something I wasn't sure would ever open again. I sat in the back seat, clutching my bag, and whispered, "It's okay. You did your best." But my voice trembled. I turned my face toward the window, watching the world go by. Strangers walking, buses passing, life continuing as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. It wasn't just about leaving a house. It was about leaving behind years of love, memories, and the dream that I would always have a place in my son's world. As the city faded behind me, I realized I was no longer just a mother. I was a woman learning how to exist on her own again, starting from nothing but the love she still carried in her heart. And as painful as it was, somewhere deep inside, I knew this was the moment my story changed. Not ended, but changed forever. When I walked out of my son's house that afternoon, the sky was heavy with gray clouds. It wasn't raining yet, but the air felt thick, like the world was holding its breath. I remember clutching my small bag close to my chest, hearing the door close softly behind me. It wasn't slammed, it was just closed. But that quiet sound echoed in my heart like thunder. I didn't know where to go at first. My hands trembled as I called for a cab. for a cab. I had packed only a few things: my medicines, a few clothes, and the framed photo of Michael when he was 7, smiling with 2 missing front teeth. That photo had been on my nightstand for years. Now it sat in my lap as the cab drove away. I didn't cry right away. I didn't cry right away. Maybe I had cried too much before. Sometimes when pain stays too long, the tears just stop coming. It was only when the driver looked at me through the mirror and asked softly, Mom, you okay?" that my voice broke. I whispered, "I'm just tired, son. Just tired, son. Just tired." He nodded and didn't say another word. That small kindness meant more than he would ever know. When I reached the small apartment I had found, it didn't feel like home. The walls were plain, the floors cold. It was one of those quiet neighborhoods where people don't really know each other, but smile politely when you pass by. The silence was loud, the kind that follows you around. There was no sound of Michael's laughter, no smell of Sarah's cooking, no footsteps down the hallway. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a cheap clock I'd bought from the thrift store. The first few weeks were the hardest. The days blurred together. Sometimes I'd make tea and forget to drink it. Sometimes I'd sit with my phone in my hand, scrolling through old photos of Michael. His graduation, his wedding, the day he became a father. I would look at his face and whisper, "Boy, you were such a good boy, Michael. What happened?" There was no anger in my heart, only sadness and confusion. I replayed every memory, wondering what I could have done differently. Maybe I was too protective. Maybe I made Sarah feel like she wasn't enough. I thought I was helping, but maybe my love came across as control. The more I thought about it, the more I realized even love, when misunderstood, can hurt. One morning, about 2 months later, I decided to go for a walk. It was early spring, and the cherry trees were just beginning to bloom. I sat on a bench at the park watching children chase bubbles and couples walking hand in hand. Their laughter filled the air, softening something inside me. An older woman sat beside me, feeding crumbs to a few pigeons. After a while, she turned to me and asked, "You live around here?" "Live around here." I smiled and said, "Yes, just moved." She nodded and said, "It takes time to make a place feel like home. I've been here 10 years and I still miss my old house sometimes." Her words felt like a small hug. We started talking about the weather, the price of bread, the noise of the buses, little things. Then she told me about her son. "He lives far away now," she said quietly. "He doesn't call much, but I pray for him every night." I looked down and whispered, "I know what's down," and whispered, "I know what that feels like." That night, when I went home, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker. I decided that I would stop waiting for the phone to ring. Instead, I took out an old notebook and began writing letters to Michael. Letters I never planned to send. Each one began with a "My dear son" and ended with "I love you always." Writing helped me breathe again. It felt like talking to him, even if he couldn't hear me. As months passed, I started to live again. I joined a small community center nearby. They had a group for older women who cooked together every Friday. We made casseroles, soups, and pies. We laughed, we shared recipes, and sometimes we cried quietly over tea when someone mentioned their children. That group became my family in its own way. One day, one of the ladies gave me a small card. On it were the words, "Healing begins when you forgive, not when you're forgotten." I read it over and over that night. Forgive. That word stayed with me. So I did. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly in the stillness of my room. I whispered, "I forgive you, Michael. I forgive Sarah too." For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but then I saw the message. "Mom, it's me. Can I call you?" All my hands began to shake. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. When the phone finally rang, I answered, my voice trembling as I said, "Hello?" There was silence for a moment, and then his voice, Michael's voice, cracked and low, said, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. There were no words big enough for that moment. I just listened to his breathing, both of us quiet, both of us remembering everything. Finally, I whispered, I missed you, son. He started crying. I shouldn't have let things go that far. I thought I was protecting my family, but I hurt you instead. Sarah and I talked. We want to come visit you, if you'll have us. My heart felt like it would burst. I couldn't speak at first, but then I managed to say, of course, this will always be your home. A week later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Michael was standing there holding his daughter, my granddaughter. She had grown so much. She ran to me smiling and said, "Oh, Grandma, Daddy said you make the best cookies." I laughed through my tears and hugged her tight. Michael stood there, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said softly. I reached up and touched his face. "You're my son. That's all that matters." Sarah stood behind him, holding a small bouquet of daisies. Her eyes were red, but she smiled. "I hope it's okay that we came." I nodded and smiled. "It's more than okay. Come in, sweetheart." They stepped inside, and suddenly my little apartment felt full again. The air seemed warmer. We sat together in the kitchen while I baked cookies, and the smell of sugar and butter filled the room. Sarah helped me stir the dough, and we laughed about small things. It felt like the walls that had separated us were crumbling. That evening, when the sun began to set, we all sat together on the couch. Michael held my hand. Sarah leaned on his shoulder. My granddaughter fell asleep in my lap. For a long time, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. Sometimes love doesn't return with big words or perfect apologies. Sometimes it just comes back quietly, like a breath you didn't know you were holding. As I looked at them, I realized that the pain I went through had changed me. Not into a bitter woman, but into someone who understood love in a deeper way. Sometimes we have to lose something precious to learn how strong our hearts truly are. That night after they left, I stood by the window and watched their car drive away. The street lights shimmered on the wet pavement. I smiled through tears. Life had given me a second chance. Not perfect, not easy, but real. I whispered a thank you, God, for bringing my son home. And for the first time since the day that door closed behind me, I felt it open again. Not in the house, but in my heart. It's been 2 years since that day, the day my son closed his door on me. Sometimes, when I think about it, I can still hear the quiet sound of that latch turning. It used to echo in my heart like a wound that wouldn't heal. Now it sounds different, softer somehow, like a reminder of how far love can stretch before it finds its way back. Life didn't go back to the way it was before, and maybe that's a good thing. Michael and I still don't talk every day, but when we do, our words feel real. There's no pretending anymore, no guilt hiding behind polite laughter. Just simple honesty, the kind that doesn't need many words. Sometimes silence itself feels like peace. Sarah calls now and then too. She tells me about their daughter's school plays, about the new recipe she's trying. I can hear the care in her voice, the quiet effort to build something again. And I meet her halfway with patience and warmth, because forgiveness isn't something you do once. It's something you keep doing gently every day. In the evenings, I sit by the window, the same place where I once cried myself to sleep. Now I just watch the sun go down, the sky melting into orange and pink, and I think about how life is like that too. Everything fades and everything returns in its own time. Nothing stays dark forever. Sometimes I smile for no reason at all. Maybe it's because I finally understand something that used to hurt so much. Love doesn't disappear when someone closes a door on you. It waits quietly outside until the time is right to knock again. I used to believe that being a mother meant never letting go, but now I know that sometimes love is strongest when you do let go, not because you stop caring, but because you start trusting. Trusting that the people you raised will find their way back when they're ready. Trusting that love, once planted deep, never truly dies. A few weeks ago, my granddaughter gave me a drawing she made in school. It was a little house with a big tree beside it and three people holding hands. She said, "This is you, Grandma, Daddy, and Mommy." I asked her where we were. She smiled and said, "At your home." That word, home, filled my chest with warmth so deep I had to look away for a moment. Because home isn't just a place with walls and windows. It's the people who come back to you. It's the love that remembers you even after silence. It's the hug that says, "I missed you," without words. That picture hangs on my wall now, right above the table where I drink my morning tea. Every time I look at it, I remember the journey, the ache, the waiting, the forgiving, from pain to peace, from being left behind to being found again. If I've learned anything through all of this, it's that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It doesn't pretend things never happened. It just makes room for tomorrow. We can't change the choices others make, but we can decide how we carry them. And I choose to carry mine lightly now, with love instead of bitterness, with gratitude instead of grief, with flow. To every mother who has ever felt forgotten, please remember this. You are not alone. Even when it feels like no one sees you, life still does. And love, true love, always finds its way home. It may take time, it may take silence, but it will return, softer, wiser, more beautiful than before.